Well, hello and welcome to this month's MillerKnoll Design Perspective. Each month, we explore a new subject surrounding the world of design. Today, we're expanding our 2025 Leader to Leader Summit discussions. Each year, this 2.5-day summit balances moments of inspiration, connection, and rigorous idea exchange with leaders within the design community. Joining us are two of the summit leaders. Please join me in welcoming Matt Hayner, co-managing principal of HLGstudio out of Atlanta, and Chantal Frenette, director and client partnerships and innovation leader for Moser Associates out of Canada. Guiding our conversation today is MillerKnoll's Director of Design Strategy, Joseph White. We do encourage you to share your experiences and to ask questions using the chat feature. So please turn your chat on if you happen to be at your desk and have your computer. Please join us. At this time, I'd like to turn the conversation over to Joseph to get us started.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you everyone for joining us online, especially those of you that are joining during your lunch hour. But we wanted to bring this rich conversation to a broader audience. We had this just a few short weeks ago in the Detroit area. And this is, as Jennifer was saying, an annual event where we bring together top leaders to really discuss what are the most pressing challenges, the most compelling opportunities. How can we have a well-rounded conversation around those things that we're all collectively facing and come to some sort of a consensus around where we want to push things? Like, what do we actually want to see become real in the future? Because a lot of that is within our control if we act collectively. So the point of today is not so much to give you a full recap of everything that happened in that moment, but to expand this conversation to all of you. So as key pressures, themes, topics come up on screen and in our conversation, think about them in your own experience, and please leverage the chat to post your own observations or questions. It'll be time to pull those into the discussion as well. But before diving into that live discussion portion, I wanted to give a brief overview of the event itself. Here's an image of the cohort gathered in front of the Cranbrook Art Museum in Michigan. And as this group was coming together, we knew that there were some key pressures that were really starting to impact the industry. And those you see listed here on the screen, this tension between expectations for speed and excellence and how this is complicated by clients' expectations. They want both of those things. They really expect high quality design, and increasingly they want it faster and faster. This is only exacerbated by the introduction of new technologies that in theory might make work easier to do more quickly. There are all sorts of things that we'll dive into here in a few moments on that, around what that implications for quality might be. But then there are also additional pressures here around supply chains, tariffs, all of this like impacting the actual business of design. One of the other key pressures was looking at authentic sustainability. This is unquestionably an important issue, but there's so much noise and greenwashing in the market from carbon offsets and various other things that aren't actually changing the system. How can we begin to reframe the conversation around circularity and changing the design and development process? Workplace activation is another really hot topic. Yes, getting people into the office, but what do they experience when they get there? What are the real amenities of spaces? Is it, a physical environment, or is it the people themselves? Integrated project delivery models was something else that came up quite a bit as something where we're seeing some bright spots and some increasing adoption of these models through different firms. If any of you have direct experience or anecdotes about those, we'd love to hear those in the chat. And then lastly, the elephant in the room, evolving AI strategies. Unquestionably some great promise, definitely some risk involved, and some really interesting implications for emerging talent. So all of these pressures were in the room with us, in the back of mind and on the tip of tongue as we explored some key themes. And so we used these 3 themes to structure our conversations throughout the event. The first one framed as creating places where people want to be. This really centered around this notion of how do you design for the fullness of human life? How do you design with longevity in mind, making sure that you're creating places that can retain relevance long into the future. The second area of conversation we framed as design without compromise, and this was primarily a sustainability conversation. This notion that you should not have to sacrifice design quality or experience in the name of sustainability, that we can actually have both of those things if we put our heads to it and really do the hard work of re-engineering those systems and processes. And then the third key theme was around minimizing risk and complexity in the design process. So this really centered on the evolution of the process of design and delivery of space, and beginning to look at how we can integrate AI as a strategic partner in a really beneficial way without sacrificing the parts of the design process that we really enjoy and value. And then lastly, this point on mentorship and how critically that important that's going to be as we move into this new era of design practice. Here are just a few images of the Cranbrook campus, the art museum on the left, and there was a really fantastic exhibit called Eventually Everything Connects. And it was really exploring this amazing opportunity of a group of people that together really started to shape a movement of modernism, certainly in the US, but that started to have really strong connections across the world as well. And then from there, we had further field trips out into that campus, whether it was diving into the archives and seeing some pieces that don't often see the light of day, but lots of time for group discussion in that facility as well. From Cranbrook, we then moved to the Michigan Central Complex. This is an amazing redevelopment story of a really gorgeous building from Detroit's past that has been brought back to life as a mixed-use event office space. And this is where a lot of our discussions were happening. So lots of in-person, face-to-face time was a key component of the event itself. Also on that campus is a building called New Lab. You're seeing an image of that on the left. This was the old Michigan school system's central book depository, where they were actually moving physical media around the city and re-aggregating it here. And now it's taking shape as a bit of a tech incubator space, working on tech-driven hardware in a lot of cases. So this was really fascinating to see a new type of physical space that is sitting at that intersection of digital technology and in-person connection. Lastly, we brought it all together in this closing session. And so this wasn't just a trip about inspiration and seeing beautiful things and having those social moments, but we really got to work and we really dug in around these pressures, these themes, to try to land on a set of key next steps. And those next steps are really going to be the frame for the conversation today. And they break down into these three broad areas. This is just a loose frame. We'll touch on some of these things and others as well. But first, we're going to dig into reframing the value of design, what that means in the context of workplace design, what that means in the context of sustainability, and then this last point here, which is probably most interesting to me of the ones on the page around designing for neurodiversity and belonging, and how this is a huge opportunity space for us in the design profession going forward. The next step is embracing new methods. And so this ranges from how do we begin to integrate AI strategically in the design process? What do we need to do around mentorship programs to build the design expertise of the future? And what does this mean for embracing new participatory design processes, not only within our design studios, but also engaging clients as well? And then lastly, the last next step that we landed on was this notion of using this as a moment to lead industry change, how we can all collectively begin to push for more transparency, specifically around sustainability, what's going into the development of the products, the materials, the things that we need to create spaces, how we can be champions for early collaboration amongst all partners in the design process. And then lastly, looking at this notion of integrated project delivery as maybe a less kind of conventional, less linear way of delivering design. So as we move through the conversation today, you're going to see these three themes again, and we're going to put them up on screen as a polling question once we've had a chance to discuss a little bit, and we'll ask you to rate of the three which you think are most impactful for that theme area. And we'll be using the feedback from those polls to inform future design perspectives conversations. And the last thing that I will say before diving in with Matt and Chantal is that the report for this event will be released today after the call. We would encourage you to go back, take a look at that, give it a read, and start posing the questions within your own firms as well. Begin to establish your own set of priorities for how you will begin to shape the future of design. So for now, I want to do a little bit of a pivot and bring our esteemed guests into the conversation with Matt and Chantal. And we're going to go one by one looking at these next steps. And the first one that we're going to start with is looking at reframing the value of design. And so those key points here around looking at workplaces, not just around interaction quality, focus more around interaction quality, not just looking at square footage, utilization ratios, things along those lines. How do we figure out what next looks like in terms of value, what a workplace can provide, advocating for sustainable design, and then design for neurodiversity and belonging. As everyone knows, our industry moves incredibly quickly, and it has been a few short weeks since the event, but things are always churning. So Matt, I'm wondering, when you think about this topic more broadly, what's resonating for you now, whether it be the things that are on the screen or something completely different? What's in your mind when you think about reframing the value of design?
Thanks, Joseph. I first kind of, in order to even answer that question for me personally, I had to really nerd out on where we came from, and go way back to, how design has influenced, us throughout history. So in that, maybe we do a little time travel here and we think about prehistoric times, how humans, shaped their living spaces primarily for survival. But there was notes of expression in that as well. And then fast forward to about 600 BC to 1700 BC, Stone Age, Neolithic era. There's starting to be rudimentary practical needs, but also there were early expressions of art using natural elements to organize space and maybe decorate space. Think bones, leaves, trees, those kind of things. So early on, there's starting to be some level of abstract human expression. Then fast forward to really ancient civilizations, and we started to see art as storytelling, more at like an elitist level. So for pharaohs and symbology related to sound and storytelling, that really fell in the hands of elitists. And then to the Greco and Roman period, where there really started to be a blending of aesthetic and engineering that started to evolve and led to kind of the modern era, and really some transformation in interior design coming out of the post-industrial era, where there was this kind of backlash to industrial, where there was this arts and crafts movement, where it was very human centric, it was human crafted, prioritization on space and beauty and functional beauty, to the early 20th century, where really the profession started as a professional practice, and things started to become democratized. Early senses of sustainability as a result of some of the effects of the Industrial Revolution started to occur. Now to kind of where we are today. And I think, what's interesting is coming out of, the ancient civilizations, and also kind of leaning into the Renaissance, there was also this kind of commonality of the bubonic plague and the Black Death, and how people had time to think, and how the Renaissance spun out of that. And there was a lot more ornate expressions of human experience. I think there's some parallels to what we've been through in COVID and isolationism. And now I think what we're finding with our clients is that there's more of our clients that are valuing the human experience in workplace design and what they can bring to their employees. I think particularly in an environment where there is optionality, where people are exploring hybrid work versus in person, I think there's a deeper understanding of the value of that human experience and not necessarily the square foot quantification of it. And so as it relates to the practical nature of interior design, I think there's probably, when you think about efficiency and fee and what it takes to do our job successfully, what I'm seeing is there's probably a better correlation to quality of experience in space related to how much the construction costs are in the space versus the overall square footage too. And so it's hard to quantify the value of the human experience, but with the methods we have now, I'm seeing that as a more practical kind of method to quantify the value that we are bringing to our clients in terms versus, feeing projects as cost per square foot. So tactically speaking, I think that's a more practical notion. But I think the common thread throughout history has been to design for that kind of the point that Joseph brought up is design for the fullness of life and design for longevity. But I think the external factors of cultural shifts, technological shifts, preference shifts have really changed about how we approach the actual organization of the material world to enhance that human experience. And I think technology will also enable us to be more insightful when it's related to kind of the neurodiversity aspects, the awareness of that sort of physiological effects that space has on us. I think we felt it a little bit during COVID. I remember in the depths of COVID, after coming out of, when everyone was kind of isolated, just going for a ride and wow, just going for a ride is a unique experience. The sensory overload, the speed, and I remember my grandparents talking about Sunday morning drives as a means of entertainment and experience. And it kind of dawned on me that, that was that experience that I hadn't really had because pre-COVID, it was just very transactional. So I think we all kind of had some of those experiences one way or another. And that's created for us more of an acceptance with the C-suite level and what they're investing in for their employees, and being more empathetic to that experience. So to me, it's given us a lot more value within the marketplace, and connection with our employees with regard to workplace design.
Those are some great points. I love how you mentioned in the early part of your remarks around the inclusion of natural elements, art as storytelling, how these kind of like the features of the physical environment were intentionally imbued with meaning. And that was something that was intended to carry the culture of a people forward. And I also really liked the point that you made around we've had this moment of pause to reconsider what we value most. What are the types of stories we want to tell? How should we reorganize our physical environments to be examples of that shift in value? Chantal, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm just curious if in these remarks, there are things that are coming to mind for you and in your practice around some of the things that you've done around being, principle-led in your design work. Are there things that begin to show up around either things that are being included in space or how space is being reorganized in different ways to start to address this shift in value? Or are there other things that are coming to mind for you around just this notion of reframing the value of design?
Yeah, I mean, certainly some of the shifts that we're seeing is very much based on choice. And so rather than a one size fits all or one solution fits all, I'm seeing a lot more, choice in the workplace so that people feel a sense of belonging and control. More of a shift towards community spaces as well, where people can connect and have those human experiences. I think, when we're coming together in the office, having this ability to come together and connect is really important. So, this notion of what we used to call the water cooler is now, it can be a quarter of the workplace now, where we're shifting some of that value to, experiences and opportunities where people can come together and connect. And so we're seeing a lot of that. And then one piece that, again, feels a little bit outside of the conversation that we're having, but just even the integration of plants and making the space feel more organic and alive is something that we're seeing on a lot more projects. And, certainly we did it in our own space and it completely transformed and it feels so welcoming and warm and so for some reason it has a quality, it has an organic quality, a human quality that you wouldn't have without those plants. So yeah.
It's fascinating. I saw, and this could totally have been AI slop. I'm going to just qualify that before making a statement. But it was this post showing these kind of split screen views of, we're in the holiday season, the Home Alone movie from the early 90s, and they showed snippets of the interior of that home from the 90s, and then allegedly maybe the same home. We don't know. Today in 2025. And it was such a stark, sad image of this kind of extreme dehumanization of the space, removing anything of interest from color, texture, etc. And this is something I've seen bubbling up in the residential space for quite some time. I'm curious what a corollary in workplace might be, around this notion of, Brandon found it in the chat. But like what that might mean for us in the types of spaces that we create within organizations. And it's a huge opportunity to have these conversations around, hey, what is it that we really value? And what is going to be the most powerful symbol of that value that we can all begin to recognize and tell stories around? Not to mention the role that might play in strengthening a sense of belonging within an organization, or the accessibility and inclusivity for others.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I can just interject on this one as well. I think we're seeing the rise of personalization, which used to be a bad word 10 years ago. We didn't want personalization. We wanted, everybody's personal things off of the desk. And, I think we're seeing it in product design. We're seeing it in many other realms. But certainly, I'm sure, Matt, you're seeing that too, the level of personalizations that clients are asking for at this point, because it does create a sense of belonging.
Yeah, I think the flexibility and adaptability. So I think there's this interesting balance that's happening between very user-centric and then combined with the connected group. And so how to blend those in a way that gives people optionality and choice based on what their tasks are, whether or not they're soft tasks or focused tasks. And so I think to Chantal's point about choice, I'm also seeing kind of the variety too. We're seeing like the variety within huddle rooms, the variety within focus rooms, so that it's not just a huddle room. It may be different styles of huddle rooms too that invoke different experiences. We're starting to see that pop up in clients. So even to themed versions of it. And I think that's kind of really intriguing to me, as far as, the why behind that. And I think it's that, it's that maybe it's a mental reset a little bit when organizations are tackling different problems, when you surround yourself with different stimulus, that you might approach something from a different, viewpoint, as a team. And so the variety aspect is interesting. So you might have a bohemian styled, huddle room, a more traditional huddle room, a quiet huddle room, so I think there's this other layer of variety also integrating into the design of workplace.
That's a really interesting point, and I'm wondering for both of you and anyone online, when you think about that variety, what's the source of it? Where is it coming from? Are these typologies that you've developed in your studios? Are they coming from personas or different work styles at the organizations? What do you use to make the decision on what makes the cut in the variety and how much variety you include?
I think for us, it's really kind of the cultural ethos of the organization we're working with. So it's somewhat inspired by, the sensing of them, and how they operate and what resonates with them is kind of the cues. But then it always has some of the attributes you need to do to just get the work done, the monitor, the power, all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot, that can be done in the peripheral with that. So to me, it's what we're finding is it's more of they're kind of driving that a little bit, but we have to ask the right questions to then bring some of those themes forward.
Bringing structure to the process and to the dialogue. Yeah.
What I can add to that is we do the same. I much agree with Matt, what Matt was saying, but at the same time, we also experiment on ourselves. So what we do in our own work environments is to test out some of those settings and get the feedback from our own people and understand the functionality and the experience of, let's say a stand-up table that, looks great on plan, but has some constraints and accessibility challenges for some people, but it also has some benefits. So once you really understand the total experience of those settings, then I think you're much better equipped to guide your clients in those decisions that they're making as well.
That's a great point, and I'm actually going to use that to hopefully seamlessly transition to sharing my screen again, and move on to that next step. I'm going to see how many times I can make that redundant statement on embracing new methods, and I've almost delayed successfully enough for the timing of this thing to load just right. So here we go. Are you seeing the slide for reframing methods?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So around this, we were just starting to bump up against this idea of developing participatory design processes. That last one down at the bottom, this has been showing up increasingly through pilot projects. I've started to see organizations begin to incorporate piloting as almost a work stream amongst their overall kind of project planning, especially in organizations that have multiple facilities around the globe. They're looking at their global real estate portfolio project pipeline and starting to look comprehensively where they can insert pilot projects throughout that timeline to begin to drive an experience collectively. I love this because this is designing with and not designing for, and you start to build more engagement. But we have.
All right, Joseph, I think the slide is on reframe the value of design still. There you go.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thanks for jumping in. So that's I think a really great point, but also up here on the board, we see this notion of integrating AI strategically, investing in mentorship programs. That one in the middle was just such a hot topic in the live event around, universal agreement that mentorship is paramount. It is so important. But then I think more interestingly, starting to begin to understand how thinking and actual process of mentorship is beginning to shift. So I was wondering, that's where I'd really like to go to first. And Matt, I know that you had some interesting insight around what's happening in your own office around thinking about development, exposure to ideas. So could you kick us off a little bit around this notion of kind of development, mentorship, and how that's showing up in your world?
Yeah, sorry to bring everything back to COVID, but this is where we started seeing the insights. But that when we probably went back to work a little bit earlier than most in person into a hybrid model, and we had a lot of discussion around, what was the appropriate amount of days, and we tinkered a little bit and made some mistakes, as I'm sure everyone did, but we settled on kind of this better together philosophy, and early on we were in Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. And part of that was what we were starting to see is, and what we're starting to kind of qualify and quantify in some regards is that pre-COVID, the amount of experience a person right out of school is getting, a year for year experience. If someone right out of school pre-COVID was getting a year of experience, what we're seeing now is it was taking 1.5 to about 2 years for that person to get the same amount of experience and interaction. And so, but we also valued, the flexibility. And so for us, we landed on the Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. And so we are really trying to focus even now with, the option for flexible work environment on Wednesday and Friday. We have to continue to remind ourselves about the communication skills. And I think that's gotten even harder with the vast range of tools at which we communicate, and in some ways the simplicity of communication. And a good example of that might be, Bluebeam. I remember the days when I would go in the morning to work, and I'd get a red line set, and it was just, you could barely see black beyond the red. And you'd sit down with your mentor, and they would tell you the why behind all the red on the paper, and then it would take you 2 days to pick up all the markups. Now with Bluebeam, what we're starting to see is that it's becoming more transactional, and there's less explaining of the why because it's so synced in real time. And so in some ways it's great that it's made it more efficient, but we're also having to be mindful and slow down and start to take the time to explain the why to the younger generation that's entering into the workforce. So we think that we can get better at the mentorship, but we do see it as being a challenge in an industry that I think is increasingly placing value in human capital and relationships.
That's so interesting. And as you were speaking just now, I was literally having flashbacks to being a junior designer, sitting side by side with my project manager, my mentors. There being moments where I learned about, how do you specify different levels of finish in drywall, and why do you use different ones in different places, and learning about different construction details and all sorts of things along those lines. There's so much value that I think we lose in not being able to have that opportunity to have that dialogue and agree. What do we value? What's most important? Chantal, I'm curious what's coming to mind for you around this notion of mentorship and development and learning.
Yeah, I think it's more important than ever because, and I'll talk a little bit about this in the leading industry change, but work has become so much more complex. So the complexity of the projects that we're working on, the number of partners that we're working with, the nuance of communication that we have to have with our clients and with our partners, you can't learn that unless you are sitting beside your peers. And this, I think there was and somebody mentioned something in our leader to leader about peripheral intelligence, and I thought that was so brilliant, that when we're sitting in an office, the chatter that you hear around you, the conversations that you listen to, the connections that you might have with the leader or peer when you're grabbing coffee, those are the interactions that that are hard to quantify, that are hard to say, okay, well, on Tuesday after I do my markups with Matt, I'm going to go and learn how to speak intelligently to a client, and so this notion of this peripheral intelligence was really key for me, because the work has gotten so complex. And so there is and even, I mean, somebody said it on the chat, but the technology is more complex. It used to be that we just have CAD. Now we have, CAD. We have CAD, Revit, SketchUp, all these different plugins. We have AI. There are so many more tools that we're working with on a day-to-day basis, that the need for mentorship, I think, is actually greater than it's ever been.
Do both of you have formalized mentorship programs in your office, or is this something that happens more organically? And those of you online, I'd love to hear in the chat as well if you have specific thoughts on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
We are about 35 people. So for us, I think the scale, we're not there. Like, I don't think we're there yet to have, I think what we're trying to build is a culture of mentorship thinking um, versus maybe a process and kind of thinking of it as a mindset. But we'll see if that works out because we might have to develop some processes in order for that mindset to take hold. So it's kind of the chicken and the egg kind of thing. But right now, it's more of trying to instill a culture and mindset around it.
Nice. Yeah, that makes sense. You know, the scale of the organization, whether it's looking at a design firm, a client that you're designing space for, you know, that has such interesting implications for the processes, the place, you know, all of that sort of stuff. You know, I'm realizing that I had a bit of a failure in my duties and I did not announce the poll question that came through. I was looking in the chat and I realized that some of you have engaged with that one on the second topic around embracing new methods. Evelyn, if it's possible to throw that one from the first section up, go ahead and do that. But if not, we can move along. So as you see those polling questions come on, I know it may be a little distracting, but that is something that will be really helpful for us to shape further conversations in this series. And I'm also looking at the clock here on this idea of embracing new methods. So we touched a little bit on mentorship, on participatory design. We haven't really dove into AI just yet. So this is something that I'd like to kind of move on to a little bit in the context of this call around what this might mean. How is this changing workflows? How is it changing the volume of work, the structure and shape of teams, the types of skills that we want designers to learn and be equipped with? I know you've got some thoughts on this. Chantal, I'm looking at you in particular. Would you mind speaking to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's here. We have to embrace it. I think there's a general understanding that we just need to embrace AI, or else we will be disrupted. It's interesting because I think for the most part, I think designers are, I would say, comfortable and dabbling with AI, but we are not quite at the point where we're really embracing it into I just mean generally as an industry. I don't think we're there yet, embracing it fully into the workflow. But what I'm seeing into the future is that it will disrupt essentially our whole talent strategy, which can be a little bit concerning to many of us who've been in this industry for many years, and especially those who are entering the industry. But what I've realized or what I've observed is really a shift in talent strategy and looking for individuals who are embracing technology and who know how to use AI, and a shift perhaps away from the traditional model where, you know, the junior designer does all the technical work and, you know, is working behind the scenes doing maths markups again, and towards a model where we have more people who are leaders and communicators and who know how to interact and co-create with our clients, because the technical work is going to be taken over by AI in the future. I mean, we know it will. And at this point, you know, we still see the value of human beings. There is still a really important role that designers have in being able to interact with technology, asking the right questions, being able to create and curate the information. So all of that critical thinking is really, really important. But certainly it's putting a completely different spin and a different pressure on designers and how we do our work.
You know, that made me think back to Matt's conjuring images of the pharaohs and how their halls were articulated and decorated in a lot of ways. And I can only imagine that in that context, there were some pretty important people that were making the decisions around what sort of hieroglyphs were being placed where. and the role that modern day designers may have, building on what you were just saying around the ability to kind of extract what's most important from those interactions with clients, and then translate that into an object or an output of design. I think that's a really fascinating area to dive into in tandem with these new tools that we have. Matt, it looks like you were about to jump in with something there.
Yeah, no, I think seeing a lot of the same things that Chantal has with her practice as well. I think it's interesting because we're starting to see on the design practice side some applications, but then on the business practice side, some applications that are happening even faster, particularly for a smaller firm. The ability to kind of continue to bring down some of the barriers between a small firm and a larger firm, I think, in research, taxes, all the stuff that we have to do as businesses and those kind of things. So I think we're seeing some advantages there and efficiencies there. But on the design practice side, we've been talking about this a lot internally, and I think it helps a little bit too with bridging the gap between a small firm and a big firm from a research perspective. Having a research agent, kind of along with us. I think it goes back to what Chantal was saying about asking the right questions. But I think it's going to benefit the industry, and I think users as a whole, because we're going to have access to a lot more physiological evidence-based design that then can guide us to practical solutions that really enhance the human experience. I think we're seeing we're employing some of that already. And then on the schematic and stylized side, I think it's the iterative aspect of it, where we can iterate on optionality pretty quick. It's got some, as we all know, some real soft spots of like, well, how do you build that? But it at least triggers additional avenues of thought that maybe we wouldn't have brought up, So there's threads there, there's golden nuggets there. And then on the mundane side, so on the kind of the technology application of executing drawings, I think dimensioning, room naming, tagging partitions, it gets about 80%. So that then I think the opportunity is the amount of time that people were doing those tasks. How do you front load that to more of human capital side and relationship side? And that goes back to kind of the invest in mentorship program. So can we free up some of the capacity with our employees on the mundane, dimensioning, tagging, those kind of things, and use that time that was for that to then get in client focus, relationship focus, communication focus time. So that would be the goal as we look kind of ahead of what the opportunities are. So that's
I think that's going to be the big unlock of finding these the real opportunity areas to save time, and then what do you do with that saved time? Like, how do you reallocate it in different ways? Chantal, you were making some statements in some of our previous conversations around how this was shifting the kind of the experience stack on a project team. And would you share some of those thoughts around, the distribution of more senior folks versus junior folks? And in the back of my mind, as Matt was speaking earlier, I was thinking about freeing up some of these more business-driven admin tasks. Is that creating more time for some of those more senior folks to re-engage in design in a different way and create more capacity? But maybe just a couple words on that before we shift to our final topic.
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing a shift. I think, in 10, 15 years ago, the project team or even the studio team would be a lot more bottom heavy, I'll call it, and more junior designers doing the day-to-day tasks, and then fewer leaders leading projects, and then also fewer projects and less complex projects. And I think what we're seeing is a flip of that, and it's concerning to me for junior designers coming into our profession, because it is a big concern that and we'll talk about what the skills are required in a moment, but what it means is that we have fewer people doing those mundane tasks because we have technology. In theory, of course, we're still working through that, but that is the, that is sort of the journey that we're heading towards, is focusing more on what we'll call higher value tasks for people to lead projects and do the client communication and extract needs and all of the, and collaboration and so on, with fewer people who are doing those tasks. So what it means is that we require all of our people to be leaders, really, to know how to communicate with clients and shifting the tasks from we'll call it lower value tasks to higher value tasks.
I think there's that brings up an interesting thought about, and I think we talked about this at our retreat, was, and to distill it down to two kind of main cultures that firms embrace. It's either like a specialist style, or generalist style culture. And I think we all have to be domain experts of the segments we're operating in. But if I were betting, it's the firms that have the generalist culture and mindset with this new technology that we're all finding ourselves, that we have a tool that are going to win in the long run, because the growth of a generalist mindset means that the employees that are in those organizations can adapt and be flexible and do multiple things. And I think that's going to be a greater value in the future than the specialist mindset that was when in the past, when tasks were very mundane, you needed that efficiency, or firms organize themselves in that way. So I think there's that aspect that also affects the culture of a firm and how we interact with each other in the firm.
That's an interesting point for us to then pivot to thinking about what change in the broader industry begins to look like, and making those decisions with intention. So these points that are up on screen were some things that came out of the conversation from the event, whether that's pushing for transparency in manufacturing and sourcing processes, championing early collaboration, not only within studios, but with clients as well, and then looking at integrated project delivery. We could spend a lot of time talking about each of those, but there are probably so many other things that we could discuss as well. Chantal, I'm wondering if you would share some thinking around what's resonating for you around this topic and what's top of mind. And while you're going through those remarks, Evelyn, if you would put our last polling question up on the screen.
Sure. Well, what really stayed with me from our conference is this shared recognition that our industry, like so many other industries around us, is going through this period of unprecedented change. And I wanted to add that I've witnessed a lot of change in my career, and this moment feels very, very different, because this time the speed of change and the potential impact on our industry is significantly greater than any other time I've experienced. And the other thing I heard from my colleagues is a rather urgent call to action from everyone in the room, that if we want to avoid becoming the next industry that gets blindsided by disruption, we cannot sit back and wait for change to happen to us. We've got to be brave enough to lead it. And as designers, we actually have the skills, we have the vision to look at things differently. We're already trained to hold complexity and imagine, a future that doesn't exist. So we're actually more equipped to own that change than we probably give ourselves credit for. So in listening to all of the discussion, I kept coming back to three main themes or areas of transformation that probably required the most focus. And the first was how we deliver our projects, which really ties into this. The second is, how we design for our clients, and that also connects to what Matt spoke about in terms of reframing the value of design for our clients. And then the third was the new role of the designer to support this new reality. And we've kind of touched on this a little bit throughout the talk. So maybe on the first one, for reasons that we've talked about a lot today, our projects are getting progressively more complex. We're asked to deliver high quality design in less time under way more constraints. And I think we can all agree to this. And, the conventional design process that most of us grew up with was originally created to mitigate risk and to, I think, bring a level of professionalization to our industry. But at the same time, that process, in many ways, is starting to become a source of risk in and of itself. So there's a mismatch between the process and these new outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So the process right now is too linear, it's too restrictive, and it often, to Matt's point, reinforces silos instead of breaking them down. So, we're talking about companies that had expertise and broken down into silos versus more of the generalists. So if we want better outcomes for our clients, we can't just tweak that process around the edges. We really need to radically rethink how we approach our projects. And that means moving towards, like, from a more linear and siloed to agile, iterative, and truly integrative. And if you think about it, complex problems can only be solved with diverse perspectives. That's a fact. So we have to be much more intentional about shaping our teams with cross-disciplinary expertise, bringing people with different backgrounds, with different ways of thinking. And in practice, I think that means taking more of an integrated project approach to everything, like really shifting the mindset. And whether we put the IPD label on it or not, I think what matters is that we're bringing all of the key partners to the table as early as possible, like designers, clients, manufacturers, contractors, sustainability experts. And I think the other key component to all of this is that transparency is critical. We have to, again, reject this outdated habit of withholding information in the name of control or something else, and instead, like, genuinely establishing a shared objective for the project and behave as if we're on the same side, because we actually are. And if I can even bring a practical example to this, just the example of a furniture RFP, and I'm sure all of us here have suffered through a furniture RFP at some point, either writing it or responding to it. And we all know the typical RFP process is incredibly linear, it's incredibly siloed. And there's almost no real-time communication between the design team and the furniture partners. And, the specs are often generic and leveled, so everything looks, equal, which we know it isn't. And the result is, a lot of frustration, a lot of rework, often a solution that doesn't fully support the design or the client's long-term needs. So, we've had much greater success, and all with the caveat that, this is a work in progress. We haven't figured this out, but we've had much greater success on projects where we start from a different place, where we're sharing the value, we're sharing the design vision, we share the budget, lo and behold, we share the budget. And we bring those furniture partners early on to collaborate openly in the best, about the best selections and that, what is right for the project. And so the experience becomes a lot more collaborative, iterative, transparent, and the outcome is a furniture package that aligns with the design. It also enhances it meets the client's budget, and it, does away with all the painful back and forth. And, that's kind of the kind of shift that we're talking about, but in all aspects of the design. And for that to happen, we really need a mindset shift. We need to think about, shifting away from a very rigid sort of process first way of working, and then towards an outcome-based model that's built on transparency and co-design, which we've talked about.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Please, you're on a roll.
Go.
Curious if the analogy might resonate, because you said a lot there that kind of got me, intrigued. But I've kind of used the analogy with some of our folks about, we're kind of going from like when we came into this industry, it's kind of, everything is very ordered. It's almost like a symphony. So we're creating, these projects that are very well tuned, risk adverse, very buttoned up, strong QA/QC. To almost now the process is changing almost to like jazz, where you get some awkwardness moments, but then you also get some like really beautiful moments,
really beautiful music,
and it's sticky, and it's but it's more fluid, it's more iterative. It's kind of like the analogy too of the what's happened in software and programming, from this waterfall linear process to this agile development process. And it's now starting to, I agree with you. I think it's a radical change that it feels different. than what we've
Yeah.
experienced in the past. So
Yeah.
And it's what's interesting to me about the Greenbrook experience is how that group came together, you know, and
That's right.
Eames, Knoll, Saarinen, you know, all masters now as we look back on them. But how much of it do we need, to your point about diversity, would either of them been masters if they didn't have each other, you know, and bringing that diversity of thinking and perspective together, that then in those periods of disruption create, you know, those kind of beautiful moments that we look back on. So I think we are in this opportunity is there where they're in this transformational moment. It's how do we respond to it, and then the value of each other going through it. In that,
You know, I've got to jump in on that point, because in thinking about the design community as a community of practice, you know, these different firms that have different perspectives. You know, Matt, you were speaking earlier about generalists versus specialists. I'm sure there are some specialist firms out there that are really like entrenched on that as a model, and I think that's great that there are these different perspectives. How can we find better ways to come together and share and learn from each other in those? And Chantal, you put out a great prompt a little while ago around this notion of how we've, you know, had this tendency to hold things so close to vest as if it's like the real source of our value. But I think you started to get at what the real source of our value is, and that's this ability to sit with and manage complexity, to have the ability to envision potential futures that other people can't, you know, and that's really the source of the value, much more so than any specific document sitting around. It becomes much more of a dynamic proposition of value.
And I think what it's
yeah.
leading to as well, if I could just jump in, is also the new the role of the designers is evolving, right? We're embracing new qualities that we've never embraced before, and we've talked a lot about that, you know, throughout our conversation today. But you know, we're seeing, you know, the need to be much more flexible and adaptable, like adjusting our thinking and our approach as we go. We need to be much more holistic and integrated in our thinking, like much more comfortable connecting the dots across disciplines, across problems. We need to be seen as complex problem solvers. So not just creating something beautiful, but also navigating those complexity. And then, of course, we talked about like being strong storytellers and communicators, because like none of all of this change happens if we can't bring it to our clients and partners. And then what I would also say, just to kind of wrap it all up, is I think we need to build more resilience in people. Like we need to, if we if there's one thing we can count on, is that change is not going to slow down. And the people who build a high degree of resilience will always find a way to adapt and learn and lead. And so if we can build resilience amongst our teams, I think that's really the way to the future. And I think, I think I came out of that conference actually quite optimistic about the future. I'm not sure if everybody was, but I think that we're truly prepared to, you know, if we're prepared to lead with courage and intent, then we as a community can write the next chapter of our design industry.
Hear, hear. Thank you so much, Matt and Chantal, and everyone who joined us online for this very short hour of conversation. As a reminder, the report from this Leader to Leader event will be made available to you shortly after this call, and view that as a collection of vetted inspiration and ideas that are coming from your peers. That is there as a resource to you. In Chantal's prompts of, you know, getting better of sitting with complexity, managing complexity, telling stories, there are some excellent nuggets and talking points that are baked into that are ready for you to pick up and run with. Thank you all so much for your time today. Jennifer, unless you please chime in if there are other things that you need to close us out. Otherwise, we can let this be the end of this chapter of Design Perspectives.
Thank you, everyone. Very insightful. Once again, we're getting to the top of the hour, and I think we could roll for another hour. Lots of reinforcement in the comments, which will be available in the meeting. As Joseph said, the report will be available shortly. It'll be online. By the end of the week, should be accessible for everyone. And we will provide a summary, one pager of this discussion as well. We're excited to take this forward and to continue this so much. And yes, the power is with the design community. So much vision, only you can shape the future. How do we get it together and move it forward beyond our thoughts and into actions? You have so much reinforcement in the comments from your peers here. So wonderful job. Thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.